Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Emotional Incest Syndrome: What to Do When a Parent's Love Rules Your Life, by Dr. Patricia Love with Joe Robinson. Narrated by Laural Merlington. Introduction. This book describes a syndrome known as emotional incest, a surprisingly common but rarely identified style of parenting in which parents turn to their children, not to their partners, for emotional support. To the casual observer, the parents may appear loving and devoted. They may spend a great deal of time with their children and lavish them with praise and material gifts. But in the final analysis, their love is not a nurturing, giving love. It's an unconscious ploy to satisfy their own unmet needs. Being a parent's primary source of support is a heavy burden for young children. Forced to suppress their own needs, they struggle to satisfy the needs of the adults. Because of this role reversal, they are rarely given adequate protection, guidance, or discipline, and they are exposed to experiences well beyond their years. In adolescence and adulthood, they are likely to be plagued by one or more of the following difficulties: depression, chronic low-level anxiety, problems with self-esteem and love relationships, overly loose or rigid personal boundaries, some form of sexual dysfunction, eating disorders, and drug or alcohol addiction. Because few victims of emotional incest can pinpoint what was wrong with their families, they have limited insight into the underlying cause of their problems. Many have a rosy view of childhood that makes recovery even more difficult. How can they think ill of a parent who showered them with so much time and attention? Breaking through this mythology is a necessary step in the healing process. Emotional incest is not a new phenomenon. History is full of people who were overly involved with their children. Human beings have an innate need for companionship and intimacy, and when those needs are not met by a partner, the natural tendency is to turn to a child. But the syndrome has become newsworthy for the following reasons. 1. Recent changes in family life, notably the dramatic rise in single-parent households and substance abuse, have dramatically increased the incidence of emotional incest. 2. The adult consequences of the syndrome are more clearly understood. 3. Recent advances in the relatively new field of structural family therapy have made emotional incest a definable, curable problem. 4. The syndrome finally has a name. I have devoted the past 5 years to researching this book. The clearer I've become about the nature of the syndrome, the more I see it around me. Fully half of my clients have an overly close relationship with a mother or father as a central issue. When I lecture on the subject, I can always count on a handful of people coming up to me afterward to tell me, "What you're talking about happened to me. You've just described my life. For the first time, I have a name for what's wrong with me." It is my hope that bringing this problem to the public's attention will help address a severe but often overlooked form of abuse and play a role in creating healthier family relationships. Pat Love, Doctor of Education, Austin, Texas. Part 1. What is emotional incest? Exploring the problem. 1. Growing up with an invasive parent. Daddy told me the day I was born he fell in love all over again. Gwen, 33 years old and a talented graphic artist, came to me with 2 of the telltale signs of emotional incest: chronic relationship problems and a curious blend of high and low self-esteem. When she first walked into my office, she seemed quite poised. She had a confident stride and a warm handshake. She was dressed in a softly tailored green suit, and her dark, shiny hair was very becoming. If I'd been an employer interviewing her for a job, I'd have been favorably impressed. At first glance, her family background also seemed fairly normal. "I don't have much to complain about," she said when I asked her about her childhood. "I'm one of those rare individuals who came from a functional family. My parents weren't perfect, but they didn't drink, they didn't divorce, they didn't hit us, and they didn't fight. So why am I such a mess? And why am I about to get my second divorce?" Over the phone, Gwen had told me she was in the middle of divorce proceedings. The year following her first divorce had been really rough, and she wanted to minimize the pain this time around. "Now that I know what your parents didn't do," I said with a smile, "tell me what they did do. What were they like?" "Well, I was a lot closer to my dad than my mother. In fact, Dad and I were really close. He called me his little princess." Immediately, a red flag popped up in the back of my mind. "What do you remember most about your father?" I asked. "One of my favorite memories is sitting on the couch with him listening to music. Dad was crazy about Mozart, and so was I. By the time I was 12, I could identify just about every piece Mozart wrote, just from hearing the first few bars. He was really proud of that. My brother wasn't very musical. Dad would say to him, 'You have tin ears.'" "What else did you and your father do?" I asked. I was looking for signs of an overly close bond. "When it was time for bedtime, Dad would put me to bed and read to me until I fell asleep. In the morning he would wake me up so we could have breakfast together before he left for work. We're both morning people. My mother and my brother are night owls. He looked forward to that time alone with me each morning. He'd talk about his job, his worries, his plans for the future." Gwen went on to say that she and her father were avid skiers, jogged together every evening, and often accompanied each other to the symphony. By now, the red flags were flying. Gwen and her father seemed more like a happily married couple than a father and daughter. They even operated according to the same biological timetable, just like a couple of newlyweds. "Did you have many friends when you were young?" I asked. Children who are overly attached to a parent generally spend very little time with peers. "You know, it's a funny thing to say, but I think Dad was my best friend," she replied. "We did everything together." "What would your mother and brother be doing while you were spending all this time with your father?" "Mother would be cooking or cleaning the house or reading. My brother would be watching TV or out with his friends." "There's only one thing that bothered me about my dad," Gwen said, switching the conversation back to her father. "He was always complaining to me about Mom. He'd say things like, 'You're smarter than your mother,' or 'I wish your mother had your sense of humor.' He'd even say those things in front of her." As she said this, she turned and looked out the window. I could see it still troubled her. "How did your mother react when he did this?" I asked. She just shrugged it off. Sometimes she'd get a cold look on her face and walk out of the room, slam a few cupboard doors, that sort of thing. But they never fought. I used to think that meant they had a good marriage. Now that I have some idea what marriage is about, and here she looked at me with a wry smile, I can see they were just putting up with each other. They had little in common, other than my brother and me. They'd go to the company picnics, but that's about all. I had been hearing this kind of sad story more and more frequently. Gwen's father wanted what we all want in life: someone to confide in, someone to be on his side, someone to share his interests, someone to adore him. Not finding what he wanted in his marriage, he, like so many other parents, turned to the next available resource: a child. He had a void in his life that he tried to fill with his daughter. "Was it hard for your father when you went away to college?" I asked. "You were so close." She nodded emphatically. "He was devastated. He was depressed my whole last year of high school. 'You're not going to go away and leave me,' he'd say. I felt guilty for leaving home. He drove me to the campus in the fall so we could have one last day together. When we pulled up to the dorm, he told me that the day I was born, he fell in love all over again. I'll never forget that. He had tears in his eyes. As our session was drawing to a close, I asked, "What would you like to get out of our work together? Over the phone you talked about wanting help in getting over your divorce. Could you be more specific?" Gwen tilted her head and bit her upper lip, then reached into her purse and pulled out a notepad and a pencil. "I'm better with a pencil than I am with words," she said. She made a few quick lines and held up the pad so I could see what she had drawn. It appeared to be a large open-petaled flower with a dark center. She pointed to the fluted edge. "This is how I feel about myself some of the time. I feel powerful, special." She paused for a second, then laughed. "My 2 ex-husbands might even say grandiose." Then she pointed to the tiny, dense black scribble in the center. "And this is how I feel about myself the rest of the time. Small, dark, guilty, worthless." The contrast between the 2 parts of the drawing was a graphic depiction of her anxiety. She wasn't what she appeared to be. Beneath her confident exterior, she felt like a frightened, guilty child. "I want to know why," she said. Gwen is a classic example of what I call the chosen child, a child chosen by a parent to be a primary source of emotional support. In the broadest terms, there are 2 ways that a parent-child relationship can be out of line. 1, the parent and child can be estranged, which means there is too much distance between them, or 2, they can be enmeshed, which means they are too close. Of the 2, enmeshment is the more common, and a close bond between a parent and child of the opposite sex is so common that we have everyday words for it: Daddy's little girl and Mama's boy. When there is a high degree of enmeshment, as in Gwen's case, it merits a special term: emotional incest. These are strong words, I know, but I use them advisedly. Just as children are powerless against a parent's sexual advances, they are powerless against an emotionally invasive parent. Their sense of self is so limited, and their need to be connected to their parents is so great, that adults have total control over the relationship. When a parent takes advantage of this power and turns to a son or daughter for need fulfillment, there is a violation of the intimacy taboo between parent and child. For the child, the consequences of this violation can be severe and long-lasting. Fluctuating self-esteem, a sense of powerlessness, problems relating to their peers and maintaining friendships, eating disorders, depression, and anxiety are some of the common repercussions. Adult children of emotional incest often have sexual dysfunctions and problems in love relationships. Unfortunately, public awareness of emotional incest is very limited, so the syndrome often goes undiagnosed and untreated. Gwen, for example, was a well-educated woman, yet she was blind to her father's excessive involvement. Even as an adult, the danger signs that were so obvious to me were invisible to her. All she saw was what she had gained from the relationship: praise and affection, extra privileges, patient tutoring, and shared confidences. Every child secretly wishes to have the exclusive attention of the opposite-sex parent, and for Gwen, this wish had come true. The difficult task I faced in the coming weeks was to help Gwen see the negative consequences of this excessive devotion. It would be unsettling for her to see how she had been harmed by her relationship with her father, but confronting this fact would give her insight into her puzzling emotional problems. For the first time, she would understand the underlying cause of her marital difficulties, and she would know why she experienced such dramatic shifts in self-esteem. Varieties of emotional incest. Emotional incest can take many forms, Gwen was allied with what I call a romanticizing parent. A parent who turns to a child of the opposite sex for the intimacy and companionship one would normally expect to find in a love relationship. In essence, the child becomes a surrogate spouse. As in the case of Gwen's father, often the parent adores the child. Typically, there is a flirtatious, teasing quality to the relationship. A variation of the theme occurs when a parent is enmeshed with a child of the same sex. Then the relationship has more of a best friend or buddy quality and lacks the romantic overtones. Mother-daughter and father-son partnerships are especially common in single-parent or one-child families, where the choices are more limited. Emotional incest takes on a decidedly different character when the child is allied with a critical abusive parent. Then the child is used not just for emotional support, but for the release of anger and tension. The child may be treated kindly one minute and abused or shamed the next. Whatever emotion the parent happens to be feeling may be targeted at the child. When a parent has such little self-control, often the family is dysfunctional in other ways as well. Domestic violence, poverty, alcoholism, drug abuse, or criminal activity may also be part of the picture. These more obvious problems mask the enmeshment. Many people who were raised by physically abusive or alcoholic parents, for example, belatedly discover that they were also the victims of emotional incest. Although at first glance there may appear to be a great deal of difference between these common forms of emotional incest, one child is treated like a date, another like a friend, another like a scapegoat, these parent-child relationships have two fundamental things in common. 1. The parent is using the child to satisfy needs that should be satisfied by other adults. The parent is turning to the child for intimacy, companionship, romantic stimulation, advice, problem-solving, ego fulfillment, and/or emotional release. The child is not equipped to handle these needs and suffers long-lasting consequences as a result. 2. The parent is ignoring many of the child's needs. When a parent turns to a child for emotional support, the child is rarely given adequate protection, nurturing, guidance, structure, affection, affirmation, or discipline. It's a flip-flop of healthy parenting. Instead of the parent meeting the needs of the child is meeting the needs of the parent. Families in which emotional incest occurs are also united by a common family profile. They tend to have the following characteristics. 1. The parent lacks sufficient companionship and support. Almost without exception, a parent or step-parent who is enmeshed with a child has an inadequate adult support system. The parent is single, divorced, widowed, or unhappily married. The emotional support that should come from a partner or adult friends is missing. To fill the void, the parent turns to the child. 2. In a two-parent household, the parent who is less involved with the child feels resentful. When one parent is enmeshed with the child, the other parent will feel jealous or left out. But since there is no recognized taboo against emotional incest, the left-out parent finds no grounds for complaint. How can you criticize your husband or wife for loving a child? Lacking a rationale for this anger, the left-out spouse abuses or withdraws from the child. 3. In families with 2 or more children, there is more than the normal amount of sibling rivalry. Sibling rivalry can be found in any family with more than one child, but when one child is getting a disproportionate share of a parent's love and attention, the rivalry can be long-lasting and severe. If you are wondering whether you were a chosen child, compare your family of origin, the family in which you were raised, to the above list of traits. The first one, a parent with unmet emotional needs, is the most telling. If your parent was single or unhappily married and did not compensate for this lack of support by developing a network of friends, it is likely that some degree of enmeshment occurred. Human beings are compelled to satisfy their emotional needs, and they will do so within the available resources. For all too many adults, the most readily available resource is a child. In the coming chapters, you will learn more about the surprisingly high cost of emotional incest. It's a syndrome that has negative implications not just for the chosen child, but for every member of the household. And once emotional incest takes root in a family, it sends tendrils into generation after generation. However, this book is not just a description of unhealthy family life. It's a helpful, hopeful book about realigning family relationships. My purpose in writing it is twofold. One, to help you overcome the numerous problems that come from growing up with an invasive parent, and two, to help you create more fulfilling relationships in the present. Applying today's insights to yesterday's families. As you take part in this recovery process, you may begin to see your family history in a harsh new light. Like Gwen, some of you may need to alter significantly your view of a parent. What looked like normal parenting may in fact have been a disguised form of abuse. Those of you who have children may even begin to question ways you've treated your own sons and daughters. If you make some unsettling discoveries, keep in mind that what I am doing in this book is applying today's insights and values to yesterday's families. Ways of relating that we all took for granted 20 or 30 years ago are now being labeled dysfunctional. A generation ago, psychologists didn't view the family as a system. They didn't pay a lot of attention to family roles, so they didn't think in terms like surrogate spouse. They focused on the needs of the individual. Because of this narrower view of human psychology, few people understood the difference between normal parenting and enmeshment. It is only because of recent advances in the relatively new field of structural family therapy that emotional incest has emerged as a definable, curable syndrome. For this reason, I urge you to look at your family, past or present, with a tolerant attitude. On some level, we are all wounded creatures struggling to satisfy essential needs, and we do this for the most part without adequate guidance, reliable information, good role models, or genuine understanding. Mistakes are inevitable, especially in the formidable job of parenting. Ideally, we should use any new insights we acquire not to blame ourselves or others, but to make our lives healthier and more enjoyable. I hope that this book will guide you in this endeavor. 2. Parents who send mixed messages: love, neglect, and abuse. When a parent relies on a child for emotional support, the results are not always sweetness and light, as in Gwen's story, the example in Chapter 1. A parent who is overly attached to a child can also be critical or neglectful, which results in a confusing mixture of love and abuse. Instead of feeling privileged for being a chosen child, the boy or girl wonders, why me? Why not someone else? The neglectful parent. I have an added measure of compassion for clients who were enmeshed with an abusive parent, because that was my situation. My mother and father were separated shortly after I was born, and I didn't see my father again for many years. For 14 years I lived alone with my alcoholic mother. There were times when she was so drunk she would stay out all night. I would wake up to an empty house and have to get myself ready for school. We had no alarm clock, so I was often late. I remember being called into the principal's office one day to explain my tardiness, and I quickly fabricated a story. I told her that we lived down by the river, and the moisture in the air gave me a sore throat. Like many children, I became what therapists call a parentified child, one who takes on many of the responsibilities of an adult. I was the one who decided what to eat and what to wear, when and if I should do my homework, and whether I should visit the man down the block who offered me candy to sit on his lap. It may seem that I suffered more from neglect than enmeshment, because I was left on my own so much of the time. However, the reality is that I experienced both extremes. When my mother was drinking, my needs were neglected, but when she was sober, she turned her full attention on me. By the time I was 12, I was her confidant, social partner, and advisor. I was there to help her fend off her loneliness and give her a reason to get out of bed in the morning, to joke and laugh with her when she wanted some fun, and console her when she was blue. I was the constant in her life, the one person she could count on. She had no husband. Her friends came and went, but I was always there. Strangely, I was not aware of being burdened by this role. I admired my mother and for the most part felt privileged to be her friend. She was pretty, witty, and fun to be around. She treated me kindly and showered me with praise and devotion. She often told me, and everyone who would listen, that I was pretty, smart, and reliable. She thought I could do anything, and I believed her. The fact that she had such a high opinion of me helped me screen out her faults. There was only one incident I recall that got me in touch with my hidden anger. The summer I was 10 years old, my mother didn't come home for 3 days and 2 nights. By the 3rd day, I was terribly worried. She had stayed away before, but never for that long. That evening, the man who lived downstairs came to the door to tell me my mother had been in a car accident and was in the hospital. "I wish she had died," I blurted. After that one outburst, my anger subsided and went back underground. The only aftermath of the eruption was that I became even more self-reliant than before. I'd discovered it was too painful to be vulnerable. If my mother wasn't going to be reliable, I was going to do my best not to rely on her. My mother remarried when I was in junior high school, and for a short time I was no longer my mother's best friend. I was not perturbed by this, however, because I perceived my stepfather as a pale threat. I was right. He had little presence and virtually no authority. He was such a non-entity that it wasn't long before my mother would have little to do with him, and I was summoned, once again, to her side. From that point on, we were intertwined like braids. We handled all the finances, made all the decisions, and did all the shopping. We ran the house. My stepfather had no legitimate role in our family. Not surprisingly, my stepfather resented this coalition between his wife and stepdaughter. When he got drunk, he'd yell at me and call me hurtful names. At the time, I didn't understand why. I kept thinking to myself, I'm not mean to him. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm a good girl. I had no idea how life looked from his point of view. I had no concept of family roles, no awareness that I was usurping his place in my mother's life. When I look back on my childhood, it's as if I spent those early years wandering blindfolded through a maze. I would run headlong into an obstacle and realize I had to turn one way or another, but I had no idea what was obstructing my path, and no idea which way to go. I had no overview, no roadmap, no guide. It's taken most of my adult years to gain some perspective. For me, as for most people, the blindfold of childhood was removed layer by layer. The first piece of information to lodge in my consciousness was the fact that although my mother and father cared for me, they both abdicated their roles as parents, my father by disappearing, my mother by consistently placing her needs above mine. This simple fact, which is now so blatantly obvious to me, was revealed only through therapy. Before that, it had been too painful a reality to absorb. The revelations continued. With a therapist's help, I realized that my mother's praise and high regard for me was partly an unconscious device to relieve her of the burden of parenting. "You've never caused me a moment's trouble," my mother had told me again and again. Underneath this benediction was a disguised ultimatum.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?